Welcome. Thank you for attending today's webinar hosted by the Organization Development and Change and Workforce Education and Development program at Penn State. Today, we have the great pleasure of welcoming our presenter, Dr. Mark Threeton. My name is Jenny Lee, and I'm a PhD candidate in Workforce Education and Development program. We also have Sagan Giri with us today, who will be managing chat feature and Q&A session. In terms of the interactive format for this webinar, please open the chat feature in the Zoom platform to interact. If you have any questions about the presentation, please use Q&A feature on Zoom. You can see the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Click the Q&A button and write your questions. The Q&A session will be at the end of the presentation. Our online Master of Professional Studies in Organization Development and Change can help you prepare to implement quality and continuous improvement initiatives in an organization. Furthermore, there is the PhD program in Workforce Education and Development with a concentration in human resource development and organization development. Our program has created a continuous monthly webinar series with experts around the world. Today, we welcome Dr. Threeton. Dr. Mark Threeton is an Associate Professor of Learning and Performance Systems and Coordinator of Career and Technical Teacher Education within the Workforce Education and Development program at Penn State. He consults, teaches, and conducts research in the areas of training development, facilities management, occupational safety, and experiential learning to promote enhanced learning and skill development. His research has been published widely in scholarly research journals and books. He holds extensive credentials across education and training. Prior to joining the Penn State faculty, Dr. Threeton was a technical educator and professional in the field of automotive technology. Here's Dr. Threeton.
Appreciate that welcome and intro there, Jenny. Thank you very much. And thank you folks for joining. It's good to have you here. Jenny, if you would be so kind to go ahead and launch a poll. We want to see where everybody's tuning in from. So if you'd please go ahead and share the poll with us. Please go ahead and fill that out. Looks like we got a pretty good group there. I think most of you have already gone ahead and looked at that. Most of us are in the northeast part of the country, which we have some joining us from outside of the country. So if from our guests outside of the country, please, if you would in the chat, tell us where you're from and things. And welcome everybody. We're so glad to have you here. So with that said, let's go ahead and look at the objectives for this session. Upon completion of this session, you're going to be able to identify challenges which plague organizations. You're going to be able to recognize the importance of experiential education. You'll be able to explain key elements of experiential education as well as the experiential learning cycle. You'll be able to describe the experiential learning cycle and how it can be used to advance organizations. And when I'm talking about organizations, we're talking about anything from business, industry, education, government, and so on and so forth. Organizations are very broad. So when I say that, that's what we'll be talking about. And then you'll be able to brainstorm application strategies to promote enhanced learning and skill development in your organization, whatever organization that is. And with that said, there's some key lessons we'll learn from this. With that said, we'll use the following agenda to accomplish those objectives on the previous screen. Our first agenda point that we're going to go ahead and look at is going to be reflection on the past. We can learn a whole lot from the past if we pay attention and really reflect on it. So we'll share some case studies we're going to look at specifically related with some important lessons for us. That will lead us into process improvement. We'll talk about how your organizations can improve. And within the improvement model we're going to go ahead and look at today, there's opportunities to go ahead and promote and enhance your organization's knowledge capital. And so we'll look at experiential learning as a pathway to promising practices via the experiential learning cycle. And so that's the agenda we're going to go ahead and follow to accomplish those objectives within the session. So with that said, we'll go ahead and just start with our reflection on the past and how important it is to pay attention to the past. And we're going to look at some case studies here. Particular cases we're going to reflect on here are, the first one is the quartz crisis. Second one is going to be the cockpit culture. Third one is going to be school safety culture. And three cases we'll look at that have very, very important lessons to be learned and to be reflected upon to go ahead and make your organization better. They can be blind spots for us if we don't pay attention to these learning lessons from our history. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and just take you to the first one, which is the quartz crisis. And I'm going to ask you to step into a time machine with me. And I'm going to take you in your time machine back to 1970. It's 1970, and the quartz technology has just hit the watchmaking industry. And quartz technology was rapid at that point to the advancement of it in the market and things. Up to that point in time, before 1970, quartz technology wasn't on the market, but it was mechanical watches. And watches were run by mechanical apparatus, gears, cogs within a watch that were powered by a spring. And some of you may have a hand-wound watch still. Some of you may have had parents that had one. Some of you may have had grandparents that had a hand-wound watch or just seen them. But the way it worked is it was powered by a spring. You would wind your watch daily to make sure it kept accurate time. There was a spring in there when you were winding the watch that would go ahead and make sure that it was wound up, just like a wind-up toy. You wind it up and then it's powered for a certain period of time. That needed to be done daily. And so with that said, it's just important to understand that was a previous technology, and the primary player in the market in watchmaking at that time was out of Switzerland. And Switzerland held the watch market at that time. In fact, 50% of the market at that time, and they were mechanical watches. The quartz crisis, quartz technology was much different than the mechanical watches I talked about that the Swiss made. Quartz technology really was a circuit within a watch and a quartz crystal, which would go ahead and powered by a battery in the back of your watch. If you have a battery in your watch that needs to be replaced periodically, that is a quartz-related watch. That battery powers the quartz crystal. The quartz crystal goes ahead and keeps time. The real advantage to quartz technology in the watchmaking industry is that the timepieces are a whole lot more accurate and less maintenance. And so as you can imagine, they really caught on the market at that time in 1970 moving forward. The quartz crisis occurred when the Swiss watchmakers really did not respond to the market popularity of the quartz watch. At that point, they held, as I said, 50% of the market. They were very strong, and they, to some extent, from what we saw, rested on their laurels. And they did not embrace change that needed to come with every industry, with every organization. And so the importance of that was they just didn't think it was necessary to go ahead and change. And they thought, people will stick with our product. It's superior, and we've held the market for this long. And they, to some extent, had a monopoly on the market of watchmaking. The problem is that when quartz technology caught on, it caught on so rapid that nobody was buying their products, or very few people were buying their products. And as a result of that, that nearly drove the Swiss watchmakers into extinction. To give you an example of how rapid the crisis was for them, there were approximately 1,600 watchmakers in Switzerland at that time. Toward the tail end of the quartz crisis, there were 600 left. There were approximately, at the beginning of the quartz crisis, 90,000 employees at these watchmaking companies. And at the tail end of the quartz crisis, there were 25,000 left of that 90,000. And so you can imagine what their profit margins did in the same sense. So with that said, it's just really important lesson with this is that your organization needs to change. And about 1981, the Swiss watchmaking companies that still remained, a few of them got together and said, we got a huge problem on our hands. We got to do something about this. And what they wound up doing was they came together and formulated what would later be called the Swatch Group. And they came to formulate a plan to go ahead and introduce their first quartz watch. And that first quartz watch came out in 1983, and it was named the Swatch. And some of you may remember the Swatch watches from the 1980s. I've actually got one right here, and you can see that Swatch watch, oftentimes different colors. This one is probably about a 1985 version, different colors. On the back, there was an easy accessible battery that and easy to change, easy maintenance and things. But it wasn't until about 11 years later that they made that change. And really that was the start of what brought them back in the market, and really relevant organization, which was really still in their trade and in their craft. And that's really what brought them back. And so the important lesson that I just want to highlight with the reflection on the past and the quartz crisis is that if you're standing still, you're falling behind. The second reflection on the past we're going to go ahead and look at is cockpit culture. From that picture on the screen there, you'll see when we're talking about cockpit culture, we're talking about the cockpit of an airplane, an airline, a plane, and just how important that relationship is between the pilot and the co-pilot. Malcolm Gladwell wrote about this in his book, Outliers. There's a chapter dedicated to the airline culture, and really explored that culture in the cockpit and how important that was. Essentially, that chapter in the book, and I believe it's chapter 7 in Outliers, that book, Gladwell talks about a slew of airline crashes from one airline carrier. The slew of crashes happened in 1980s and the 1990s with Korean Airways, and really highlighted the crashes that happened during that time period. And he examined the relationship between, in these plane crashes, causes by human error, not mechanical issues, not maintenance-related issues, not things like that, but human error. And it really, Gladwell really looked at and examined the relationship between pilot and the co-pilot, and how important teamwork and communication was between those two individuals to make sure that planes were landed safely. And what that chapter really determined was that in a number of these crashes, the co-pilots weren't speaking up and weren't questioning, weren't challenging the officer on how to resolve the issue at hand. Gladwell in that book talks about, there's one instance that's documented very well about a plane. Visibility is lost when the aircraft is coming in for a landing, and that visibility is lost. Pilot alarms are going off in the cockpit, all kinds of problems are occurring, and the co-pilot doesn't speak up to go ahead and help out with things. And so the pilot goes ahead and panics. At the last few minutes of the flight, the co-pilot says, "Pull up." And the pilot then pulls up and winds up hitting a mountain and crashes the airplane. And so just illustrating an example of how important that relationship is to making it, when it's smooth sailing, it might work in that, that framework and things with one officer and not working together. But when crisis occurs or something is out of the normal, that teamwork is just so essential to making sure that you bring the plane in safely. And if you've read this book, I read that particular chapter, you'll notice that Gladwell talks about this, and his findings are more anecdotal in nature. There is a research study that was conducted in 2017 by Inmato and Geisler that really looked at plane crashes too, and tested his theory, Gladwell's theory, and really examined the plane crashes between 1970 and 2012 in 68 different countries. And it really what the determining factor there, what the results findings of this study really determined, was that power distance between pilot and co-pilot really positively related to plane crashes. Another finding from this study was that, and this was a scientific study, was that cultures in these 68 countries where the cultures were more individualistic, there were less crashes, plane crashes in these types of countries and things. And so that's from 2017, a scientific study on this. And so another lesson here for us to really, really focus in on is that it is just so important to make sure that there's that communication, that teamwork is happening in the cockpit. We don't fall victim to poor culture around us and things. The silver lining to this story is that Korean Air had a terrible safety record as a result of all these accidents and things. This organization really took stock of that, and they really they doubled down their efforts to get better and to improve. And now today they've made the changes, started those changes, and they've been declared one of the safest airlines in the world now, which is remarkable, the change that they've had and they made in that time period. And so great kudos to the organization for doing that, because it really turned out well for them. and it almost threatened their existence if they didn't address it. So with that said, lesson number 2, don't let your culture around you determine your outcome. The third case study we're going to go ahead and look at is school safety culture and how important that safety culture is. I wrote about this safety culture in a 2014 article that I wrote, Occupational Safety and Health Practices, an alarming call to action. And it highlighted one particular accident in this publication, this journal publication, focused in on an instance in a technology education program or a career and technical education program where an 11th grade student in an electrical technology related program was cut what was believed to be a de-energized wire in a circuit box. They were instructed to do that. The student went ahead and followed the instruction, went ahead and did that, and were electrocuted by 277 volts of electricity and immediately rushed to the hospital for treatment of burns. They were lucky to be alive. The sad thing about it is about 9 months later, a similar electrical technology program, the same accident occurred. Nearly the exact accident occurred. In both instances, the instructors were not present when that accident occurred. And so that really speaks to the volume and the culture in those organizations, in these educational institutions and what was taking place there. There's no record of what kind of improvement was made with this, but I certainly hope that these organizations for the safety of kids, really address this and really didn't let this be a problem again. So lesson number 3 with this is put safety first. If an accident occurs, learn from it and don't make the same mistake twice. So that's safety culture. And you think about all the safety issues we have going on right now with the pandemic and how important that is for us to address safety, keeping everybody safe around them, and safety culture is paramount. In March of 2021, I wrote a safety manual for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, particularly addressing safety and health within technical programs in schools. And Pennsylvania Department of Education went ahead and published that handbook. And it is available here, so I'll leave that up there. I know we have some educational administrators that are probably joining us today. And that's, if you scan the QR code there, you just open up your camera, go ahead and wait for it to load, click the link as it pops up, you'll have access to the safety manual. It addresses incidents and protocol for safety in schools in general, as well as technical education programs. And it deals with things like the pandemic and the crisis we're going through right now with school safety, but also accidents and things like we talked about with this electrical technology education program. So in the spirit of improving on the past and making sure we learn from history, our friend Winston Churchill had something to say about this. And with all 3 of those case studies that I pointed out earlier, it's just important to note there is a learning lesson in all of them. I don't think any of these organizations want to repeat that history that they experienced. Within that first case study, the quartz crisis, again, if you're standing still, you're falling behind. That's an important lesson to learn with organizations, any organization. If you're standing still, you're falling behind. You always got to be thinking ahead. The second one, we were dealing with cockpit culture. Again, the lesson there, don't let the culture around you determine your outcome. The third one, school safety culture, just making sure, put safety first, but if an accident occurs, make sure we learn from it and don't repeat it. Those things are very important. So with that said, I know there's a diverse group of professionals that are on this call and are on this webinar with us today. And what I want to just say is I want to open this up, and Jenny at the beginning said that our chat is available, but I'm curious, this is an opportunity for you to get engaged in this a little bit. I'm going to be looking at the chat, but I want to throw this out there just for a minute. What are the challenges in your organization? I want you to reflect on that just for a minute. We'll take some time here. I'm going to look at some of your chat and I'm going to address some of those. So if you would, just go ahead and type some of your challenges in your organizations. I shared 3 challenges with three distinct organizations here that I shared with you. But what are your challenges there? So go ahead and use that chat there and just reflect on your organization, whether it's business, whether it's industry, whether it's government, whether it's education. What are your challenges? So we'll look at that. So take a minute and do that, and just type those in there if you would. Thank you, Emily. Moving fast and not reflecting on what's done. Sometimes we refer to that as the flavor of the month. A lot of organizations do it. It seems like new trends come along, like the ice cream shop. It's the new flavor, what's coming along, and we don't reflect on what's been done, and there's no organization with it. So I appreciate that, and that happens with a lot of organizations. Communication with remote workers, absolutely, Ronald, and that's exactly right. Communication, ever challenging, particularly when we're working, a lot of us are working remote, and what's happened in the pandemic and how we've had to transition. Legacy of past workers, and thank you, Sue, appreciate that, and I'm glad you're joining us, Sue. Legacy of past leadership and how important that is to really think about that, and what that means to successful transition of an organization, making sure we work together. As one leader changes, just making sure we transition and still follow that strategic plan that's in place for that institution, that organization. I love it, James. That's not my job, right? That's that culture. That's not my job. I just work here. So yeah, that's kind of a funny term we throw around, but yeah, there's sometimes that's a culture of an organization too, that it should be that collaboration and that teamwork, and really speaks volumes to that cockpit culture we were talking about there, and how important that teamwork and collaboration is among one another to get it done. So good examples there. I think great examples there, and feel free to put more of those in there if you want. And I just think they're very, very important for us to reflect on those. Again, we don't want to repeat the past, and we really want to correct our future and get our flight plan back in order. And just like these three organizations, we need to take stock in the fact that every passing second is a chance to turn it all around. With that said, it's important for us really to transition to the next element of the webinar here, but really we want to talk about process improvement. And one of the first things you do with process improvement, this is Six Sigma's process improvement model that some of you may have seen, others of you may not have seen before, but it's a very, very important model that is all geared around getting better and addressing issues. Just like those case studies that we provided at the very beginning, how important it is to understand and address your problems. In two of those cases, those two organizations, the quartz crisis, those Swiss watchmakers went ahead and addressed the problem. They worked together on it. The Korean Air I was talking to you about made a remarkable turnaround. They're one of the safest airlines today. It's because they really doubled down their efforts to get better and to address the problems. And the last setting was school culture. I have no idea if those organizations went ahead and addressed it. I would certainly hope so. But just really important to address these things. And I'll explain this model for you. But it's important first and foremost to be honest about it and really define the problem. Defining what the organization, what the workforce thinks the problem is, the leadership thinks the problem is. And then measuring that problem and making sure we understand, is this a surface related problem? Is this is more depth to the problem there that we really need to focus in on? Or is it, something we can address quickly, or does it take a full-blown effort to go ahead and turn our organization around? And really measuring that problem, and then analyzing the root cause and what's causing this problem and how do we address it. And so when you get to that analysis of the root cause, you could discover in your organization that, it's not just the problem that we're talking about. One problem manifests itself into three problems or six problems. And so when that occurs, you have to go back to defining the problem again and starting over until we really dissect this well and we have a handle on that problem. Because problems can be deceiving sometimes if you don't understand the rest of the story. And so one of the things we really need to focus in on is addressing that problem. Once we've addressed the problem, we truly know what that is. We need to go ahead and measure it, determining what are the tangibles, intangibles related with this problem, and how complex is this. Once we identify that, it's the root cause, what's causing this. Then moving into the improvement and making sure we implement and verify a solution is appropriate for this. And really just focusing on that solution. Again, at any one of these steps, it may be that you need to go back and reevaluate and go back several other steps just to start over and think about what that problem was so you truly address it. And it doesn't just become an activity just for the sake of checking boxes to say we've gone through a process improvement. If you really want to do this well, every one of these steps takes a lot of investment by leadership and by those around them to make sure it's getting done. You think about the Swiss watchmakers in an example I gave earlier. The organization depends on it. The lifeblood of the organization depends on the ability to change, the ability to adapt, to understand the problems, and to move forward. And that Swiss watchmaking incident, you can go ahead and compare that to what's happening today. Look at what Amazon has done since their start in 1997 to now. What's that done to retail face-to-face shops now? And that even before the pandemic, when shops were still closing down because they were being taken over by the online market and things. And so you think retail outlets aren't looking at this model right now and trying to make improvement? That's a real case in point here, what they're trying to do with things, and really need to focus in on what's the problem, measuring the problem, analyzing the root cause, improving, and making sure you implement your solution to it, make sure you verify the solution so it's working, and so on and so forth. The last step I'm going to talk about here is controlling, and that's quality control, and how important it is to make sure you maintain that solution that you've come up with to address that problem, that root cause of the problem there. There's three elements of the control element, the control portion of this model that you really need to focus in on. And that's quality control, quality assurance, and quality management. And it's so important to make sure you have a handle on all three of those. And that's a process of making sure you get it done right and get it done well, and that you don't slide back into some of your old habits, like some organizations and some of the challenges that you put here in the chat and really worked with it and shared with us in your examples of your challenges you've got there. You need to go ahead and come up with the quality control, make sure you maintain that solution, and have your whole organization on board with what's taking place there and how you need to revolutionize what's going on here with this. So with that said, when you break down that control, that quality control portion of this model, there's some important elements that are really important with this. First is identifying who's responsible for what, getting yourself organized. And a big portion of this is training and education, making sure your workforce, making sure your leadership, making sure, if retraining needs to take place, that needs to take place at this control point. If new training needs to take place, it needs to take place at this process at all. So we need to build competence through authentically, And so my question to you is, why do organizations embrace lesser forms of education and training, such as lecture and memorization for their training? And if you're the future of your business, the future of your organization depends on it. Why too often do organizations focus in on lecture types of training, on memorization of facts and things like that? I can memorize things forward and backwards, but does it mean I've learned anything? It probably goes in one ear and out the other if there's no context or no context for that. And so it's really important that we really embrace learning by doing within this quality control model, and really embrace rich forms of education, as opposed to just going through this for the sake of training and saying we completed the quality control training that goes along with this to recorrect our organizations. And so again, folks, when I talk about organizations, we're talking about business, industry, education, government. We need to correct paths. There's always challenges there, but we need to use this model to go ahead and control it. So in the spirit of improvement in things, and we're talking about quality control, quality assurance, and quality management. In the spirit of that, I just want to talk to you about the use of experiential learning. And I talked about how it's important to learn by doing. David Kolb and his researchers went ahead and really identified experiential learning as it's learning by doing. It is it's a model that we wish more organizations use, but it's grounded in the principles of constructivism. Experiential learning is really, it allows the student or the learner to fully engage in the learning process. And so it's a combination of four elements that is a research-based framework in education that is used widely, but not used as much as it probably should be. And the research and really what David Kolb and Alice Kolb, for that matter, and other researchers that work with them on this, really what they determine with this experiential learning cycle is that in order for the learning in an organization or with your participants to be as enhanced as it can possibly be, it needs to be a combination of giving the learner an opportunity to experience something concretely, or the at the top of the screen here, giving them concrete experiences to learn from, giving them an opportunity to reflect and observe, or reflective observations, Giving them an opportunity to go ahead and abstract conceptualization. This is the thinking. This is grasping abstract concepts that come along with the learning or learning something new. And this happens within training or retraining. And then actively experimenting that goes along with it too. And that adage, Rome wasn't built in a day, applies here with this. And active experimentation is part of the learning process. And one of my concerns with our educational process is today, we focus on doing the best we possibly can the first time and focus less on the stumbling that maybe some of the errors we made along the way, and not reflecting and not thinking about those errors to have improvement that goes along with process improvement, goes along with learner improvement and development and things that way too. And so educational institutions need to within a controlled environment, a safe environment, really promote that active experimentation. It's okay to make mistakes, because through that becomes mastery learning, and that's really important to true development. So much more rich educational platform than lecture memorization and things that sometimes organizations fall within, and truly the learning is enhanced as what it should be. So David Goldman, the research there really promotes that in order for this learning to be as enhanced as it possibly can be, it needs to incorporate experiential education, which is concrete experience, reflective observations, and active experimentation. It's a continuous process of learning and development, and really important for us to recognize. If any one of these components is missing from the educational experience for the learner, it's not going to be as enhanced, or there's going to be some kind of disconnect with it. And the research, Kolb's work also says that the learning can start at any one of these 4 points. It just needs to include this for the transfer of learning to be promoted as best as it possibly can. Really important for us to think about that. So with that said, that may seem a little abstract to you now, but I'm going to kind of bring this home for you on the next slide here. When we talk about experiential learning to promote the transfer of learning, those terms that we used on the last slide, concrete experience, reflective observations, abstract conceptualization, and active experimentation, may mean nothing to you. But here's what it means when you're designing your instruction, where you're the learner. The reflective observations are watching, giving the learner an opportunity to watch and reflect on something. Just like if you were learning something for the first time and you were doing that project at home and things, you might pull out your smartphone and you might watch a YouTube video on how to do that particular task at hand. That's the watching component. Then you needed to probably think about what you saw when you watched that particular video or an instructional video for it. Then you're going to practice. You're going to go ahead and do that, actively experimenting, part of the learning process. And then you're going to be actively, or the concrete experience that goes along with this is feeling what it's like to do it well, and feeling what it's like to actually do it, not just think about it, not just practice it, but do it right and do it well through a concrete experience and things that go along with that. I'll give you an example of an organization that uses this here in a minute, but I want you just to reflect on it. And I think most everybody, looks like we've got a number of people on the call here, but I want you just to think about when back at a time and close your eyes just for a minute and think about this. But when you had to go ahead and learn to drive. Now, it may have been with a loved one, a close friend of yours, and you were learning how to drive a car for the first time. And if you did that correctly the first time you did it and didn't have any errors, you are what we call an anomaly. And so just really thinking about your learning experience with that. And some of you may chuckle at the experience and things, but it's a memorable one. We all had to learn to drive, or maybe learn how to ride a bicycle for the first time, and there's growing pains that go along with it. But I want you just to think about that cycle, and you can open your eyes with me now here too. But when you learn to drive a car, you learn to watch. You watch somebody else do that first, probably from the passenger seat, maybe the back seat, but you watch somebody else drive. And then you had a chance to think about them driving and think about what it means. Hey, boy, what do I have to do here with the gas pedal? What about the brake? I need to make sure everything's right and doing this right. It really thought about it after you watched it. And then whoever was teaching you probably said, okay, I've showed you the basics. I've given you pre-flight instructions on this. It's your turn to go ahead and do it. And it's your turn to get behind the wheel and do this. And you got behind the wheel of a car, and it was your turn to actively experiment with this. And you actively experimented with it. And you weren't very good at it at first, and neither was I. And so you learn from that process. And with more practice and with more repetition, you built mastery of that particular skill. And then the feeling that comes with that too. Remember, there's a feeling that goes along with driving the car too. How much gas, how much pressure do I need to put on the gas pedal to go ahead and get it to accelerate slowly or moderately, as opposed to peeling out in the parking lot where you were learning? How much pressure do I have to put on the brake so I don't go through the windshield of the car when I approach a stop sign? And the feeling that goes along with that when you're learning. And just there's a lot of feeling, a lot of growth that takes place there. About mastery learning. Back to my original question is, why is it that in the quality control piece that so many organizations focus in on training with lecture and they don't focus in on authentic experiential education that truly focuses on competence and mastery learning? And that's a combination of watching, thinking, doing, feeling. And I'll give you an example of an organization that's using this right now that's pretty remarkable and pretty advanced, but UPS company. If you're going to go work for UPS, one of the prized positions at UPS is becoming a driver, and great benefits with UPS, great opportunity, but everybody wants to be a driver, and they have a process for becoming a driver and all of that. But once you're selected to be a driver, they have what, for lack of a better expression, a boot camp where you go to a training center and you're learning the process, not only to be a driver, but also the protocol that goes into operating the truck correctly to lifting correctly. They're doing an outstanding job with their training of really incorporating experiential learning. And I'll give you one example. They do it in many places, but UPS uses it. They are very focused on at UPS about ergonomics and body movements and making sure they preserve safety and health within their workforce, which is great practice. And so they really want to make sure that they preserve the longevity of their workforce. Not only that, but then when they retire, those folks retire, that they can have a retirement that's enjoyment. They don't have the aches and pains that go along with the labor of their work at UPS. And so within one of the training simulations that they do, they focus in on unloading correctly and loading correctly a truck, unloading and loading. And they have sensors on floor pads in that truck, in the simulated truck that's there. And they can tell through those sensors, and they'll have a worker go through that's being trained on that. They'll have them go through and unload the truck by themselves, as they naturally would do it without UPS's training. They compare that, and then they go through the training of how to do it correctly. And then they go ahead and monitor both with their floor panels and their sensors. They can tell through their sensors how much pressure that worker is putting on their back, how much pressure is being put on their knees, how much pressure is being put on their, the posture that they use, and by those sensors and things. And they illustrate with every one of their workers that goes through that if you go through and you operate and you cut corners and you unload the truck like you did before the training, here is the life expectancy you have as a UPS driver. And here's the amount of retirement you can expect with a shorter lifespan in your career with UPS as a driver if you don't follow the ergonomic procedures that go along with doing it correctly versus not. And then they compare doing it correctly after the training, and what that means, the difference in the pressure on your extremities and when you're unloading that truck correctly and you're doing that right. Within that simulation, they're using a combination of watching, thinking, doing, feeling, just like the experiential learning cycle. And as a result of that, they're building a workforce that's safe and doing it well. And so it's pretty neat how they revolutionized their training with that, using sensors to really illustrate, hey, this is they want 3 points of contact for that driver when they're unloading, loading that truck. So it's less pressure on their knees, their joints, their back, and it's much less than that. And UPS estimates that if the drivers don't use those 3 points of contact, that over the lifespan of their career, they could be putting so much pressure, so much weight on their joints and things that it's in comparison over the career life expectancy of their career to putting an ocean liner on your back. That much pressure, that much weight on things, and you can imagine what toll it would take on your joints. And so experiential learning and practice, that's a great way that UPS is using that experiential learning process to do it, and doing it well. So it's very remarkable how they've implemented and integrated Kolb's experiential learning cycle to promote knowledge capital and practice within their organization. So with that said, a lot of lessons learned here, but just some really important things to think about. So that model, experiential education, is super important. And the way I use this when I'm obviously I'm an educator, but the way I use this is as an instructor, as an educator, I make sure with my lesson planning, with my when I'm designing instruction, I make sure I give my learners an opportunity to watch, to think, to do, to feel. So that's a tip to take away from this, is when you're designing instruction, don't rely on lecture and something that's convenient. Let's have people watch, think, do, feel. And if you address those elements, that's the experiential learning. It's experiential learning at its purest form. It's authentic. It's going to promote the transfer of learning as opposed to lecture or memorization going through one ear and out the other. So take that back with you and really use that as a learning opportunity here from this webinar. So Jenny, I'm just going to ask you to put up this other poll. I've got a question for you. What do you think is the most neglected instructional element of the experiential learning cycle? And Jenny has a poll for you here. She's going to put up that you can go ahead and guess. Again, active experimentation is the feeling portion of the cycle. Concrete experience is that's the feeling. The active experimentation is the doing. Reflective observation obviously is the reflection, and the abstract conceptualization is the thinking. So please respond to that poll. Still have some coming in here. Looks like we've got a few more to go. If you haven't responded yet, please go ahead and respond to that. And thank you for sharing the results. If you share the results there, if you haven't already, Jenny, that'd be great. And thank you. If you said reflective observation, you wouldn't be right. And more often than not, we're excellent in education and in training of giving people things to do. What we probably need to work on is really having people reflect and observe, and I think some of your comments on earlier in the chat there, you said the challenges that you experience in your organization, and one of the challenges there that was noted is not having a chance to reflect on what's being done and then what's to be done in the future. And just reflecting on the is really, really important for us to think about, and making sure we integrate that. I'm on a sabbatical this semester with Pennsylvania State University, and a research project I'm working on my sabbatical is this very question. We're looking at the experiential learning cycle used with technical educators in how they're teaching safety in their technical programs. And we're using the experiential learning as our framework to measure what they're using with that. And within technical education related settings or career and technical education settings, instructors are overwhelmingly saying that they're using experiential learning, but maybe not authentically. What they're really focusing in on is giving people things to do, which is the basic concept of experiential education, is learning by doing. But there's more to the story and more to it than just doing that. We need to give people an opportunity to reflect on what they learned, and need an opportunity for people to think. So in technical areas that you're teaching, really important to note that, this will be published, but research really reveals that there's something to making sure we give people an opportunity to reflect on things and not focus exclusively on the doing portion of it. Also, one of the things that was noteworthy about the study that I'm doing right now is that people tend to integrate or go ahead and consolidate the thinking stage of the experiential learning cycle and the reflection stage. Now, there's some relation there between the two, but they're two distinct components of that experiential learning. If they're combined, you could be neglecting one or both and not giving them the full attention that they need. So pretty interesting poll there. And Jenny, thank you for facilitating that for us in that poll. So in technical settings, it's really that reflective observations on things. And it's really important to understand that and learn from that concept there, because it's something that can really improve knowledge capital and practice within your organization and moving forward in things. So with that said, bringing it all together, there's just some things here I want to just have us remember with this webinar. First and foremost, learn lessons from history. Don't go through the school of hard knocks. Sometimes that's the only way people can learn and the only way organizations can learn. But we don't have to be that Swiss watch companies, the way they fell behind for 11 years and almost went into extinction. We can learn from the past, and we can make wise decisions beforehand rather than becoming a victim of history. And so really learning from that. Another thing with this is positive change doesn't occur naturally. we need to address it through process improvement. Just like if you're trying to, it's, the end of the year is coming up here and we're getting ready to start a new year here pretty soon. If one of your New Year's resolutions is to go ahead and get yourself in shape, that's not going to happen naturally, is it? You need to get off the couch. You need to go out and get yourself in shape and really take natural steps to do that. That takes effort, and that takes planning, that takes process, and that takes improvement. Same thing with this. Positive change doesn't occur naturally. It needs to be it really needs to be something that you're very assertive with, and really identify that problem going through that process improvement model that we talked about earlier. And then the last thing I would say is that just back to that question, why do so many organizations rely on lesser forms of instruction with lectures and memorization and other things that really don't promote the transfer of learning the way experiential learning does? So build knowledge capital in your organizations by doing and by experiencing those things we talked about through reflective observations, through abstract conceptualizations, through active experimentation, and through concrete experience that is there with the Kolb's experiential learning cycle that we talked about. And if you do that, you're setting yourself up for much more of success than you would be otherwise. And so just really important to think about that and just really address that in your quality control piece of that model that we talked about earlier. And with that said, my contact information is here for you. If anybody has any follow-up questions for me, I would just say that we have a great organization development and change program here. I know others in our program, other faculty members would love to talk with you about it if you're interested in learning about the concepts we talked about here today. There's a lot to be learned with this. I covered this very, very basic elements of it, but there's a lot to be learned here for yourself personally, professionally, and also for your organizations too. We have a whole host of courses available to go ahead and give you the training that you need, the education you need to go ahead and make the positive change that you do both professionally and for your organizations too. So my contact information is there too, and we'll go from there. So, and thank you for that. And we'll go ahead and the Q&A session here now.
Thank you, Dr. Threeton. So we have quite a couple of questions here. I will start with the first one. So Shala Devudi asks, how can experiential learning be applied in educational settings?
Yeah, and a couple of examples like that. I just, obviously the way it would go if you're an educator, it'd be designing your instruction. If you're the educator, designing, facilitating learning. So it's structured in such a way where you've got opportunities for people to reflect and observe. They have opportunities to fully think about things. They have an opportunity to go ahead and really just embrace and practice things and do things. And then they have an opportunity to feel things and feel things that way. So for me personally, in my education, I make sure when I'm lesson planning or I'm planning for instruction, that I really do a good job of making sure, I make sure there's something for the learner there to go ahead and really engage in that way. If I know I'm winning with this, if I look through it, am I giving students an opportunity to reflect? Am I giving them an opportunity to think? Am I giving them an opportunity to do? Am I giving them an opportunity to feel in that process too? A couple of examples to the question. Right now, you'll see higher education institutions across the country looking for ways to integrate this into internships, into job shadowing opportunities, into study abroad opportunities, and just really giving the students a full experience in this. And so, it's really important to look at that and really, if there's an issue with this, use that process improvement model of identifying what the problem is, measuring the problem, identifying the root cause, going ahead and implementing that the solution to it, and then going ahead and quality control on that. But a couple of examples there in higher education would be internships. Organizations do that. A lot of engineering programs, you see, making sure they incorporate those things into the student experience and a holistic approach to that learning. So much more rich than otherwise. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. So Miriam Mousy asks, how do we implement experiential learning virtually, especially in COVID times?
And that's an outstanding question, very timely question with things. And I'll be honest, that's been a challenging thing for us, and that's been a very, very challenging thing for us. And so one of the ways we've done that is the power of video, and sometimes 3D video can allows us to do some of these things. And I was just a couple of weeks ago, I was down in Florida, Orlando, presenting at a conference, and I was giving an example of the experiential learning cycle and how it could be implemented. And I was using an example of experiential learning with knot tying and using a bowline knot to go ahead and illustrate the key points of it. But I think it's a concept of when having props, having things for students to actually do while you're going through that virtual, whether it's materials, supplies that they got, where your learners can actively be doing something on the other end while you're working through on your end, the instructional side of it. Certainly challenging when you have people working from home and working from other parts of their work and where they're at and things, but it can be done if they have the right types of materials around them. The key concern I have with it is the safety component. I teach in career and technical education. It's very challenging in that field to replicate the same kinds of things at home. You can do it on a smaller scale with things, but through object-based lessons and things people have at home and instruction that way. But it is challenging, so I'll be honest with that. But we're coming a long way with the technology, with augmented reality, virtual reality, and things that way too. And so I think we're just scratching the surface on what we'll be able to do with this in the future. So great question.
Thank you. So we have one more question. What are some of the ways that organizations are using experiential learning, and how are they using it?
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent question. I think I gave the example of how UPS is using that and how they're using it for their driver training and using it in other places. That's one example of where it could be used, and they're using sensors in their trucks and doing that. Other examples, just to highlight again, just the higher education institutions are making sure this is part of the holistic education process for students. And to be quite honest, I'm not sure they're quite sure on how to do that yet. It's program by program at this point. If faculty members that are invested in that, then change is happening that way. But other organizations are really taking stock, and some may be doing this and not even realizing it and not doing it authentically. And so I think you're seeing this pop up in study abroad related programs, structuring internships with this. Also within in education, you're seeing cooperative education. And that's a school-based work experience programs that you're seeing in the K through 12, actually the middle school through high school related situations where students visit workplaces, and they have an opportunity to engage in that workplace and learn through active experimentation, through watching, through thinking, through doing, through feeling, and they're having an opportunity to do that. So we're seeing it in cooperative education. We're seeing it in other forms of education as well. So, and other organizations.
Thank you. So we have another one from James M. He asks, have you done any work with simulations for experiential learning in a remote environment?
Yeah, and funny you should say that. A few years ago, in 2018, and before the pandemic, I was doing some simulations with our rural campus, developing some curriculum for a class we have, WFED 411. It's one of our OD&C courses. But we used a series of 3D videos. We did 3D videos and really gave an opportunity to simulate the experiential learning process through safety evaluations that we were doing in workplaces. And the 3D videos allowed you to actually walk through the workplace with a VR headset. And you could go through and experience in the same thing. You could go ahead and interact with the environment and really define what were the problems with the environment, and you could experience it. You could, again, reflect, you could think, you could do, you could feel. And so pretty neat concept there. And I think technology is advancing even more now, but the technology at our fingertips really allows you to do more and more of that now. And the thing about it that's so neat is that even the cost is coming down with the technology, so it's more readily available than it's ever been and things. So pretty exciting time for us in education training and just in the like. So.
Thank you. I think we have time for one last question. So how do we get buy-in for changes in organizations when the upper management are not on the same page as managers and technical leaders?
Excellent question. Justification can always be challenging, especially when the bottom line doesn't necessarily, maybe profit margins aren't where they need to be right now. But I think the buy-in is really illustrating where this has been successful for other organizations, and really illustrating that well, and how important it is to the bottom line of this organization. Giving examples of organizations that didn't embrace change, and what happens when, like the quartz crisis, for example. I mentioned Amazon earlier and how they're revolutionizing the way business is taking place. They're also putting people out of business. So I think it's not a matter of so much justifying it, is highlighting our past and making sure we don't become a product of our culture. Again, those 3 learning lessons I just point out from this webinar is that, again, if you're standing still, you're falling behind. The second one is, don't let your culture determine your outcome. And the third one is, if an accident occurs, put safety first, but if an accident occurs, learn from it and don't make a mistake again. So I think back to the justifications, learning from history and really promoting that and communicating that well to your organization. If you do that well, it's not a matter of if you'll get support, it's a matter of when and how. So that's how I reply to that. And it's an excellent question, and one that I know a lot of people are wrestling with right now.
Thank you, Dr. Threeton. Back to you, Jenny.
Yeah, I would like to thank Dr. Threeton for sharing knowledge, expertise, and wisdom with us today. If we didn't get to your questions, feel free to send us an email, or you can reach out to the presenter directly via email. On behalf of our OD&C program, we hope you found this webinar helpful. We would like to hear your feedback on our webinar series. Please take the survey using the link in the chat box. If you cannot get the link, we will send it to you via email. Our next webinar is about Hope Action Theory for Organizations by Dr. Yoon on December 17th, Friday from 12 to 1 p.m. And also Penn State MPSC OD&C and Workforce Education and Development Program is offering its first virtual free conference on November 19th. We invite everyone here to join us for learning and networking. We have many practitioners and scholars in the HRD OD field as presenters. Registrations for all events can be found on all of our social media platforms. Thank you all for attending today, and happy Halloween. Thank you, Dr. Threeton.
Thank you, team.